is how we do it, and we're not going to apologize for it. This is how things go around here. And that's actually a hard thing to get because everybody wants to do their own thing. Everybody wants to do what's right in their own eyes. And so getting that buy-in, because you don't enforce customs the way you enforce traffic regulations. You don't give people tickets. Instead, it's social approval and disapproval, right? It's like when somebody, somebody wears a hat to the worship service and you give them the stink eye. Like, that sort of, like, you're not going to be like, hey, we're fining you $5 for wearing the hat. Like, that's not how you enforce those things. Instead, it's, hey, everybody goes, hey, you should be doing that. And everybody goes, yeah. And so he goes, okay, I'll take it off in order to be respectful, because that's how we do things around here. So that's customs. We don't have strong categories for honorable and shameful, fitting and unfitting, and that's a gap in modern American culture. Okay, now the other piece about that is passing on your ways. This is why it's important. You want to pass on your ways to your kids, right? In order to do that, you need your ways to be reinforced and validated by other people's ways. Other households, like you need community buy-in. You've all had the conversation. You got a teenager, you've had the conversation. Why can't I wear my hair like that? Why am I not allowed to wear these clothes to that place? And you're like, and you just want to say, just because, right? And like, that's not a legit answer. I'm dad. How you do it? But it helps if other people in the community are like, yeah, this is how we do it. Like in other words, there's a way in which part of what the communities need is you want to harness peer pressure for godliness, right? Like, that's why you want your kid to choose friends wisely, because you're trying to harness peer pressure for godliness. So when it comes to clothing, entertainment standards, weekly habits, you want wider community to reinforce what you're trying to do. Now, we're not all clones. It's not like everybody does everything, but there's like a range. That's what you're aiming for. And you need multiple overlapping spheres. And here's the problem. This requires planning. It doesn't just happen. In a world of lots of chosens, like when everything was given, that was easy. When things are chosen, it's harder. So you need to anticipate how your priorities will fit in the coming years. So here's another principle. Church is the spiritual center of a community. Worship's at the heart of it. I said that. But when you have school-age children, school is actually the practical, daily, weekly, and yearly center of your life. Now, something, I learned this one the hard way. Okay, so I'm going to tell a little story here, and then I'm pretty close to being done with my story. Okay? What's the schedule say? 11:30? Good, perfect. Right on time. Okay, so about 8 years ago, we planted a church in Minneapolis. Okay? And our goal, we planted out of Bethlehem Baptist, which at the time was a multi-campus mega church in a major metro. That's lots of ifs. I have been a Baptist pastor for a long time. So now here's the deal. Small towns like Moscow have certain givens. Okay, you can get anywhere in 10 minutes. Rush hour traffic is no biggie. Okay, major metros have other kinds of givens, like rush hour traffic is a major factor that you have to consider, and then there are lots of options in every which direction. Lots of neighborhoods, lots of schools, lots of churches, lots of extracurriculars, endless combinations of communities in a major metro. So you think about your situation, what kind do you live in? So our hope when we were planting Cities Church was we wanted to have a neighborhood church. We were coming out of a mega church, multi-campus, and we wanted to have more of a neighborhood focus, overlapping communities, not a commuter church. So a number of our founding families, including most of our pastors, lived in a particular neighborhood in South Minneapolis. Our church rented space in that neighborhood where we met for worship, and many of us worked relatively closely. Now, the job one is less central because you're commuting there maybe for your work, you're not necessarily, your family's not. So we were all there. And when we planted, almost all of us had young families. I think the oldest kid at the time was probably 7 or 8. Okay, my oldest was 6. Okay, here's what we didn't plan. Right? I wish somebody would have told me. If there's no K-12 school that your community has buy-in for, this will be a problem. And you won't even recognize it until it's too late. Because what it meant was, as our kids, most of us weren't homeschooling families, there wasn't a K-12 school, a Christian classical school, a Christian school in that neighborhood that we all were like, this is our school. There wasn't, we were meeting in a Christian school, but it was not great and it was really expensive. So our kids grew, this fundamentally altered the community. So my family found a classical Christian school in the western suburbs. Okay? Other families found another Christian school in a northeastern suburb. Okay? And then you can just imagine what began to happen. As the center of gravity, practically, logistically, of our lives, as our kids grew older, shifted to where some of our families had center of gravity in the northeast, and our family had center of gravity in the west, and now it's pulling apart. Then our building blew up, literally. The building we were meeting, it had a gas leak, and it exploded. So you laugh, it's fine, laugh. People did die, so that doesn't seem to be like it was a tragic thing. It was really tragic. And then all of a sudden we're homeless. We're like Abraham wandering like in the city, like, will you let us be here? And we did that for a year. And then we finally found another spot about 3 or 4 miles east in St. Paul, and we rented that space and then we eventually purchased it. So now, here was the end result of those number of years for me as a dad and as a family. Our family was just fragmentation. We lived in South Minneapolis. Okay? We drove 20 minutes east with no traffic to church. I drove 20 minutes north to get to downtown where I worked at Bethlehem. And then we drove 20 minutes west for school when that's at like 6 a.m. when there's nobody on the road. In traffic, it was 45 minutes to an hour each way. Okay? So what did this do to our lives? What did this do to our notions of community? Okay? And then at that point, you start adding extracurriculars. My boys are in baseball, and so we're doing practices, but we live in Minneapolis, so are we playing for Minneapolis or for Eden Prairie in the West? Like all of those it was logistics that was causing the problems. What we had was, we ended up with a church community, a school community, a work community, and then a baseball community. 4 different communities with almost no overlap. And we loved them. They were all great. They were all great. We loved every one of them. But because of no overlap, it was exhausting, it was frayed, we were spending hours in the car every day, and it was like, this is not sustainable. This is not sustainable. So it was a logistical problem that hindered group of communities. That's why overlap matters. So here's the final thing. I'd encourage you to take inventory. Here's the kind of questions you should be asking. This is what you sit down with your wife or with other leaders in your church. Here's some questions to just take stock and think about logistics. How many distinct communities do you have? By distinct, I mean very little overlap with other communities. So like if your church has a school, and so a lot of the families from church or families at school, that's still one community, and good for you. Okay? But if it's not, then like there's a baseball community, and they don't go to your church or they go to your school, but you play baseball or football or something, that's different. And that's going to pull. There's going to be some stretching. You got to take stock of that. Where are the opportunities for overlap? Second, how much time do you spend in the car each day? Just actually add it up. Okay? How much time do you spend in the car each week? How much time does your wife spend in the car? Right? Those kind of questions. How often are you able to sit down for family meals? Is that a possibility? Or do you skip those a lot because bragging? How many people are you actually aiming to build quality relationships with? This is something I think is especially where a husband can help lead a wife, because our wives, as relational they are like, I want to connect with these people, and they just accumulate people over time, right? And so then they're trying to maintain, and they're texting with these friends over here, and they're building a relationship with these people, and eventually they run out of capacity. They forget that they're human, and that they can't actually maintain that many relationships. And it's painful and hard to say, hey, you're just not going to be able to spend as much time, because we're in a different season of life now than we were then. So do you have a realistic number that embraces your creatureliness? How far away do those people live? And how much overlap do you have with them? That's holding that question. Here's a really important. Do your kids have friends close by? I think I underappreciated this early. Because when they're young, it was easier. But like as they get older, I could just feel that like my boys didn't have anybody in the neighborhood who went to church. Well, they had one family who went to church with them, and then nobody from school who lived close to us. And it was like, I could just feel it. They're like, I have boys, like, they're like caged animals. They want to get out and run, but I'm not going to turn them loose in our South Minneapolis neighborhood where every kid in the neighborhood has a cell phone, which is just a brothel in his pocket. And I'm just going to say, yeah, go hang out with that unbelieving kid every day. I wasn't going to do it. And so I'm like, no, you can't. You have to. And so then they're like, feel trapped, and they don't even know, because they're kids, and what's normal is what's normal. But I can see it, and it's like, hey, this is a logistics problem. This is a logistics problem. And then, last question, do the various communities that you have reinforce your ways or undermine your ways? Like, are they helping you? Are they cutting with where you're trying to go, or are they undermining it? I think it's possible, and I think in some ways from a mission perspective necessary, that you have a foot in a community that is undermining your ways. It's stress testing, right? In other words, like so, you're going to play baseball and there's a bunch of unbelieving kids on that. You're going to do sports extracurriculars. Now, the dominant one, your dominant community cannot be undermining your ways. If it is, you will lose your kids. Right? This is why we say get your kids out of those public schools, because that's a dominant one. And it's going to shape them. But if you have a solid church community that overlaps with your school community and you're working with good guys, then you can say, hey, as a family, we love playing soccer, and so we're going to be in the soccer team, and there's a bunch of unbelievers, and our kids are going to encounter stuff there that they, whoa, what in the world is happening? And that's good. That's good. Now you can lean into that. But because it's not totally undermining what you're trying to do with raising your kids. All right, so last principle. The worldliness around us, the unprecedented access to options that we have because of our technology means that this is the way one often puts it, it's helpful. Ordinary virtue requires heroic moral effort. Okay? Ordinary virtue will require heroic, like you will have to make crazy choices that you feel like this is crazy compared to a lot of people are operating, but you have to choose it, and then here's the challenge: you have to keep on choosing it. Okay? Like it's going to require perseverance. Seeking to build and maintain a godly culture to pass on your ways to the next generation requires a resilient faith and costly obedience. And that's always been true, first century or 21st century. But the presence of more chosens and the loss of so many givens means we are compelled to choose wisely and to persevere in choosing wisely in the face of options. Endless options. And that requires Christian order. So in sum, to summarize this, thick communities, Geneva option-like communities, require gravity. What you're aiming for is gravity, both spiritually and logistically. Spiritually, glad-hearted worship of the living God is the center of gravity. It's what pulls us and orients us and causes our planets to orbit right. But you have to combine spiritual gravity with practical and logistical gravity. Overlapping spheres, face-to-face presence, proximity that allows for shared daily and weekly and yearly rhythms, reinforcing community customs which are honored and respected by the households in your community, that give opportunity for all of the one anothering that Doug talked about earlier. These are crucial for knitting us together and providing gravity that will then be compelling to the world, that will draw them in, and it will enable us to pass on our ways to the next generation for God's glory and for our joy. Let's pray.